so I don't know you guys too well. I'm actually at the Gene Center, and the term scientific computing experts, they came up with that for this. So I'm doing a lot of things. I'm caring for the computational needs of the house, and it's diverse. It's biochemists. They have no idea about computing. Some of them have been doing it nonetheless for 20 years. So they're very focused on getting their research done. It's not about latency. It's not about algorithms. They have a little idea about these things, but it's really about getting the Nature papers out. So they don't care what I do. And it's made as something where young people can come and get a chance to do things that they maybe usually don't have so much freedom to do. And so this fitted kind of well with my background and what I was interested in. And I'm actually a computational linguist and not a biochemist. And well, so this worked out for us. I don't know if it works elsewhere. And this is kind of where I come from. So the Gene Center was established in 1984 by Ernst Ludwig Winnacker, who later he was head of the DFG, the German Science Funding Foundation, and is now General Secretary, I think, of the Human Frontier Foundation. So he's a big guy, and he had a good idea about establishing such a center. It was established at the MPI and now moved to the university, I think 10 years after it was established, and is now a central research facility of the LMU. We have about 15 labs, a lot of young group leaders who get a 5 years chance to do a Nature publication to later maybe become a professor. And it's now grown to over 300 people from over 20 countries. And this huge growth in the last years was due to Patrick Kramer, who took it in like 5 years from 150 people to 300 people. And he's even made it that we get a new building for systems biology. So I think this area can be a lot of interest to you guys if you come from supercomputing, because we have a hard time using these supercomputers because they are made for low latency physics stuff and other stuff that doesn't really interest us so much. So we are more focused on, from the computational part, we are more focused on what Facebook does maybe, because it's I/O based stuff. Huh? So the research focus of the PIs is structured biochemistry, genome maintenance, and regulation of gene expression. Basically, we try to figure out what proteins, that's the building blocks in your cells, it's the moving parts in your cell, what are they doing, how are they looking, how are they regulated, stuff like this. And this end up, currently it's very on vogue, so you get into Science, Nature, and Cell. And this is what the people have to deliver at our institute also. So it's also about not staying around if you're not good. And I think this is more like they do in the US a little bit, so it has this US touch. We have some research techniques which are like, usually you do only one. We do a lot of those, and they're expensive and stuff. That's cryo-electron microscopy, that's X-ray crystallography, and at the DESY, for example, we shoot, and here at our house we compute them. And next generation sequencing is ramping up very, very huge. So I think this might be the hugest computational stuff for the next years, especially also on the I/O side. And then we have computational biology, where we don't know where this takes off, especially with system biology, where you can imagine if you want to simulate whole cells or even small pathways in there. So even small pathways can easily take a page in a book if you write it down, and no one really understands it. So I think there will be a lot of computation in that direction. So as I've said, we have diverse computational needs, and we have the high-end instruments to give us a lot of data. And a lot of the work of a PhD student at our institute will be focused on working with the data. And the Phi Titan Cryo is what we have as the currently biggest producer of data. It's a €4 million microscope. But the sequencing is ramping up. This is like €500,000 for Illumina GA2. And There's the successor of the GA2. Maybe you know it from the Bain Sequencing Center. It has 100 of the bigger ones, the newer ones, and 18 of those, they say, produces as much data as the LHC. So you can see how much computational needs are there. And also some high throughput roboting, mass spec, stuff like that. So it comes in, and we kind of try to work out how to work with the data. Can we use PhDs? Can we use ourselves? And the biggest is 3D reconstruction from cryo-EM. So that's basically up to 10K raw micrographs in a 4K by 4K format. So we have 32 megabyte of very noisy input because it's soft matter. So you cannot use high dosages. It basically looks like the test image in your TV. And using up to 1 million particles that get picked from the micrographs, we compute 3D mass densities, which you can see on the right. So this is around the area around. This is what we compute, and later on people model the real structure in the air. So that blurry thing where you try to find in something very exact, but you don't know how. So the further you go down with resolution, the easier your modeling gets. And it's like 1 year computing, 1 year modeling for your PhD usually. The software packages that we mainly rely on is Spider, which supports MPI for some years, 10 years I think, I'm not so sure. And it was developed by Frank in 1978 already. And then we have the new one, which is Relion, which gets easily down with much less effort down to this 4 angstrom that we target. And it needs MPI. So we were kind of looking how to get a Linux cluster that also works good with MPI. And of course we thought of something like this, but it's a little bit it's too large for our rooms. We would have bought like half a rack and with a certain budget. So this was kind of out of the question. And so we settled for something which we now find very, very useful and nice. And it's called AMD bought the company, it's Seamicro, so it's now called AMD Seamicro SM15K. We already have 2 10K machines. Last year it was not available in Europe. We imported it from the US. The nice thing about it is also about how much work I have to do. So it's not something where you have to think a lot about how you move it into your rack. It's very easy to put there and power on and things like that. So it doesn't need special cooling. It had 4 to 6 normal power cables. And I had like 128 nodes productive within 48 hours. Of course, I had the cluster provisioning system already running, and I just had to power up the servers and a little bit of configuration. But it's 48 hours. You buy this thing and you're fast on track. I saved time. The people could compute faster. It didn't take weeks or anything. And I was testing only shortly, and I was very confident putting this productive, and it's running ever since. And people are my users are very, very happy with those. So one good thing about it is that it doesn't take too much power, because we have a normal refitted server room. It was a different usage of the room at some point, and now it's used for computational purposes. It's a little bit like an in-housing, but it can only do like, I think, 10 to 12 kilowatt per rack. And so you cannot go too dense, but you still want a lot of computational power. And when looking at the MPI, what we wanted to do, we also wanted to use this MPI thing. We saw that we get a lot of bandwidth per low power CPU, because the chassis uses low power CPUs. We come to that later, and I hope you will see my point there in a table. So for me, it's total cost of ownership, also entry price. You can get into this much lower than with the minimal configuration of the Cray before. So it's like not a $500,000 to spend at the first day. So. And flops per watt, so that we still are in our power budget. And also very interesting was the interconnect, which kind of seemed to come for free. So you don't have to pay a high price to get special interconnects.
Excuse me. These are single CPU nodes?
Yeah. So your question is basically answered with this slide. So this is what a server looks like. So it's really reduced, like you maybe read about Facebook or something. So it's really reduced. So there's no case around it, nothing. So if you buy it, you think, I'm not paying for something I don't need.
These are 6 core? Or how many?
We come to that later in a table. So this is in comparison to a blade center's node. So what the blade calls a server probably. And as you see, it's much smaller. There's not the casing around it. So if you see this, you say, "Oh, I pay for a lot of casing. Why do I do that? I never put it out. Why would I why take it out of the blade center? I don't know." And this is the comparison. So it's much smaller. And this is the table you were asking. So basically, it has 64 nodes. Compared to blade centers which have maybe 16, you get a comparable number of cores. Depending on your CPU, with AMDs you even get up to 512. We now put a blade center there which is like comparable, but you know, how do you compare these things? I don't know. So we tried. And what we get is, as the first advantage we really see, is that we get network gigabits per core. Because these machines, they have 2 CPUs, each CPU has 8 cores, so they have per server 16 cores. And if you put in a 10 gigabit card, you have 16 cores on the one side, 10 gigabit interconnect on the other side. Now these machines have only a 4 core or 8 core chip, and they get 8 gigabit of bandwidth. So if your computation is bandwidth starved, this is something you might want to look into. It's also very efficient, and so the HPL performance is about the same with the blade center. We don't know it. So I also have some numbers from AMD. I've not measured that myself. But if you look then at the power efficiency, you see it's a good reduction. And every watt you save usually twice. And so MFLOPS per watt, for example, the highest number is 785 compared to 548. So you can see this is a huge step in the right direction if you're looking for watts. And the price of the machine also goes down because they don't have to put so expensive CPUs into one server to get down to amortize for the blade center. You pay a lot for the blade center, and to amortize, they can put in very cheap CPUs. For example, the CPU price per core is 65 euro for this low power Xeon, versus if you divide the 1200 euro of the Xeon, you get 150 euro per core. So you get a cheaper CPU. It can go low power. It doesn't need QPI. So there are some technical points why the machine can be had for a nice price. And of course, since they were now bought by AMD, you might be able to negotiate a very nice price for the AMD Opterons. But I'm not sure. What we have is not the Opteron is not available on some sales site, so I couldn't compare prices. I just looked it up at GuideSize, if you know that. So, and usually we were using standard Beowulf cluster, and as you can see, I mean, there's not much you have to look at. It basically cuts in the space in half and also the power. So coming from that side, it's not a big question for us. And you get on top a lot of storage options. You get the switch inside. You get this Freedom Fabric, which is a 3D torus. So you get a lot of toys and options. So this is how one server can connect to the storage. It's totally configurable. One disk can go into any node, read-only, for example. So if you have a computational biology database, a bioinformatics database, you could theoretically mount it in all the servers as a read-only database. or you could also RAID together the storage. So it's very flexible. So I haven't played around much with it because the machines just run and the users just use, so I don't have much access actually. So I would have to put them off, and I don't like that. On the networking side, that's the other side of the machine. So again, everything is totally flexible. You can put in up to 16 10 gigabit links. And also, whether you don't have to go to assign one port to one server, the machine can handle this. Again, I haven't played around with all options, but the basic idea is that you get a lot of freedom. And this is how the machine looks like from the side view. I mean, you really, if you see that, what would you take away? There's nothing left to take away. So on the side, there are the servers are here. So it's like pop, 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 pop. And basically there's a strong air going through, so it's the loudest machine I ever had. And if you are behind it, it's cool. So also the power budget of the CPUs, they can now do this frequency scaling, they can go up because it's still cool. And on the back you have the interconnect, so this is with fiber, how is it called? So 10 gigabit fiber. And so now with the SM15 case, they also introduced an option to put in more storage. Basically, you have a connect for the storage, and the storage will also be able to take part in this freedom. Everything can be assigned either as a RAID or one disk for each node. So they actually come from the hosting part, so that's why they were so surprised finding someone using their machine for computational purposes, because they designed it for hosting companies. And besides this, all the advantages you see on the computation side, I also thought, so if they come from hosting, it must be stable, because in hosting you cannot afford that your customers constantly lose their nodes, right? If your web server goes down, that's not something you like. So, and this had also been the experience, they just run. And they have a command line interface. I think it's an embedded NetBSD. You log in, it's like a Juniper or a Cisco or something. You say all servers up, all servers down. I mean, for someone who likes the command line, this is the best thing you can have. Yeah. So how much time do we have still?
1 minute.
So I can do my thanks. So I thank Roland and Andreas for providing the images from the Nature paper, which the end phase was computed on the machine, and this was really great because the machine came, they ran, and they could go up in the queue, so they could really finish up their stuff. So we were starving for that at the time, and so it just came and ran, and this was so good and not fiddling around. And I thank Yang Song for the fancy slides, so I cannot do this, he did that for me. And Joshua Mura, who did some benchmarking for the HPL power. Questions?
Okay, thank you.